As part of IPI's focus on transitions in the Middle East, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Abdul Mawgoud Dardery. IPI has increasingly hosted meetings that relate to the dramatic events unfolding in the Arab world. We've had the Nobel Peace Prize winner Tawakkol Karman, the April 6th movement leader Ahmed Maher, among others from Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and Yemen, offering insight into the transitions. Today, just after the second anniversary of the revolution, I'm very happy to have Dr. Dardari here. I'll ask the first few questions, and then I'll open the floor for discussion. Dr. Dardari is a prominent parliamentarian. He is a member of the Muslim Brotherhood's Freedom and Justice Party and served as the Member of Parliament for Luxor from 2011 to 2012 till Parliament was dissolved. Currently, he's the director of the Luxor Islamic Center for Global Dialogue and a member and spokesperson for the Foreign Relations Committee of the Freedom and Justice Party. In this capacity, Dr. Dardari headed the FJP's first delegation to the White House last April, and he also serves as a key advisor to President Morsi on tourism. Dr. Dardari has a PhD in cultural studies from the University of Pittsburgh and has taught at various institutions in the US. I first met Dr. Dardari on a research trip to Egypt last July, when he encouraged me to visit his city, the ancient and beautiful temple city of Luxor, that sits on the banks of the Nile in Upper Egypt, to interview young political activists. Dr. Dardari, welcome again. I'm very glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you.
When we last talked, you just held a town meeting with your constituents in Luxor. This was in July. We talked about how after the revolution, people's expectations have changed, but often the attitudes of government employees hasn't. How the revolution hasn't really filtered through state institutions, making it hard for anyone, including members of parliament, to deliver. Today, the authority of the state and the legitimacy of political institutions is being questioned. Street politics rule. There's instability and turmoil. The second anniversary of the revolution was marked less by celebration and more by violence and protest. How do you explain the events of the last 2 weeks?
Let me first thank you in particular and the IPI for inviting me and providing me with this great opportunity to be able to get to know one another and listen from one another rather than listening about one another. It is very important in these difficult times that we're living in the world in general. I am a believer in this one humanity concept that all of us as human beings have the opportunity to be able to live together regardless of our differences, whether gender, race, or religion, or any other difference. And based on this is what got me away from the academia into the political life, is that believing that we as human beings, we have the potential of working things together through dialogue. And I am also really happy to be given this opportunity to share with you what I think of how Egypt is moving now. And as expected, we did expect this turmoil. That is very natural development after a revolution, a great revolution indeed, like the one that took place in Egypt. It was the most peaceful revolution. Millions of Egyptians went to the streets together in the first 18 days as one community, Muslims and Christians. Even they used the Tahrir Square as a place of prayer, where Muslims would pray, the Christians would protect them, and vice versa. On Sunday, when Christians pray, the Muslim masses will protect them. That great image, because it took place, it is likely to come again and again and again. It is true that after that, the political skirmishes started between the political different forces. My experience in the parliament was very difficult experience because previously I did not really have an experience. We were not allowed to have an experience. In fact, during Mubarak's regime, if we were to run for an office, most likely we would be arrested before applying for running for the office. So you can imagine us coming, many of us are coming from almost with ideas rather than real practical experience in how the municipalities or how the government or how the parliament is functioning. But in spite of this lack of experience, but this great willingness that we have inside us is to try to present the best alternative to the Egyptian people. We ran for office. I ran for the parliament, and I found the great support from the people of Luxor. In fact, I got the largest number of votes in Luxor in the history of Luxor. So it was really this trust between us as members of the Freedom and Justice Party and the people not only of Luxor but of Egypt in many different parts of the country that really gave us the necessary power that helped us to move and spend sleepless night to try the best we can. The Egyptian people in the March referendum, it chose to go the legal, gradual way, not the revolutionary way. And that meant a lot. A revolutionary way would have put up everything upside down, and we would have either repeated the problem of the previous revolution of Nasser when he had revolutionary tribunal where people came to courts, where people lands and money was confiscated, and it did not really produce a better alternative in Egypt. The 25th revolution preferred to go the legal, the gradual way. And that's what's really causing the difficulty now that we're having. The state structure has not changed yet. And that is making it very difficult for people to feel that there is a change, that the revolution really produced them with something. Before I just conclude very briefly, there are 4 pillars of corruption is still going on in Egypt. Corrupt elements of the police are still there. Corrupt elements of the judiciary are still there. Corrupt elements of the state bureaucracy and corrupt elements of the media. And with these 4 pillars of corruption, the Egyptian people are struggling their way. I am very optimistic we will be able to get there. We will be able to overcome these challenges. These are expected challenges. Let us not forget, for 60 years, Egyptians were not allowed to voice their concerns. And all of a sudden, everyone has the right to say anything to anyone. So it is likely to take us some time until we'll be able to negotiate our way out of this crisis.
Okay, well, the 4 pillars that you mentioned do exist, but at the same time, we also have people out on the streets, and a lot of them are chanting about what they perceive as the Muslim Brotherhood's majoritarian instinct and lack of inclusivity. At the same time, obviously, we have the National Salvation Front headed by the opposition group headed by Dardari, which says it's going to be boycotting the upcoming elections. And right now, we're caught in a situation where the government cannot govern and the opposition will not oppose. Given that, what is the thinking within the Muslim Brotherhood on how to respond to these charges of the fact that the Brotherhood isn't inclusive enough and isn't bringing people into the political system?
Yes. Okay. These are really important questions. Let me address them one by one. The high expectation. You know, when you participate in a revolution, sometimes some of us will think we need results right away, here and now. And that is not realistic. That is not an easy way to do. It takes time. After years of corruption, you visit Egypt, all state, all services, social services, take it from the health services to the educational services, there is corruption to the bones. So corruption is very difficult to take it by an administrative decision. It really requires a lot of people to be able to work without corruption. That bribery is still in the police traffic departments, is still until today. Many serious problems are still. It is going to take us some time. It is good that we were able to establish, to have the referendum on the constitution passed with 63.8%. So this is a step forward. We still need to put the laws into perspective so that everyone feels that he or she under the law. In Egypt is very important. You will find me always going back and forth between Egypt before the revolution and Egypt after the revolution. Before the revolution, there were few people above the law. They represented no more than 1%. And the majority of the people suffering under the law. So this is not going to change because it has become a mindset. I remember when President Morsi suggested the five ideas for the first 100 days. One of them was cleaning. Then what we did in Luxor, I, as a university professor, with members of the Freedom and Justice Party, went to the streets of Luxor cleaning with the people who are supposed to clean the streets. We wanted to show an example that this is our city, and we would like to leave it clean so that we move on with the ideas, the great ideas of the revolution that consider to be dignity, freedom, and social justice. So we wanted really to emphasize the importance of dignity. I went to the streets. It was nighttime. People welcomed us in the streets. We did clean the streets. I can tell you that. But what happened? The next day, the streets did not stay clean because it really requires a mindset that when you have a piece of paper, you don't throw it anywhere. It takes education. It takes time. So this is concerning the expectation. There is high expectation. The unemployed would like to feel that the next day they're going to get their job. It's impossible to be able to make hundreds of thousands of jobs available in just the first 6 months of the presidency. Having energy everywhere, having running water everywhere. Projects like this take time. Compare it to the French Revolution, or compare it to the German or the British. Compare it to any other revolution. Usually these things take time, but it requires a lot of effort from us to be able to convince the populace that this is really requires time, not only time, but it requires popular participation. Now concerning lack of inclusivity. Let me quickly say a story that happened with me yesterday when I was coming from the airport. This is an Egyptian habit, is I talk with the taxi drivers. So I got to know him, and when I spoke, I found myself speaking with an accent, and he also was speaking with an accent. I said, "Where are you from, sir?" He said, "I'm from Egypt." Oh, I said, "That's a good opportunity. Let me ask you, what do you think of what is going on in Egypt?" He said, "Oh, I hate Muslim Brotherhood." This is how he started. He didn't know me. I said, "Yeah, that's a good idea. Why? Can you tell me why?" He started telling me this inclusivity, that the 28 governors of Egypt are all from the Muslim Brotherhood. The 35 ministers are all from the Muslim Brotherhood. And I kept listening and listening and listening. And then I said, "Would you allow me to share with you where I stand?" And I introduced myself. The man was shocked. He really looked back. He was almost going to make an accident. He didn't believe that he was talking to a member of the parliament from the Freedom and Justice Party. And I explained to him that out of the 28 governors, less than 10 of them are members of the Freedom and Justice Party. And based on their professionalism, not really based on their affiliation. Out of the ministers, we have 35 ministers in the Egyptian government. Less than 10 of them are from members from the Muslim Brotherhood. We're really trying very hard, and we will continue, regardless of the street turmoil. We will continue to be as inclusive as possible because we believe that Egypt is bigger than the Muslim Brotherhood, is bigger than the Freedom and Justice Party. Egypt is for all the Egyptians, and all Egyptians are really required to come together, to work together so that they can produce the best alternative that Egypt deserves. Concerning the National Salvation Front, I don't know if some of you today, before I came here, someone called me over the phone and said the BBC had a polling about the Salvation Front, and 82% of the Egyptians do not think that it is really a Salvation Front. So that tells you the Salvation Front, from not only from my perspective as a member of the Freedom and Justice Party, but really do not have lots of following in the streets. And that's why they're really concerned about the election. Because if there is election, most likely they're not really going to get a lot of votes in the coming election, as we've had two referendums and 3 elections. And in the 2 referendums, they got about 20%. In the 3 elections, they got really no more than 20%. So I think Many in Egypt consider this more of a media phenomena, and they really are disconnected from the aspiration of the people, but they're politicizing the existing crisis for different reasons other than what I...
There is no doubt that the opposition is disorganized, but at the same time, Egypt is incredibly polarized. Everything we see on the streets and hear from people, whether it's your taxi driver or others, there is a sense of polarization between the Islamists and the secularists. And it does seem that at this point, a national consensus is absolutely imperative for Egypt. Why have efforts for a serious and encompassing national dialogue failed?
Yeah, national consensus and national dialogue, two key words in the Egyptian politics nowadays. In fact, President Morsi tried no less than 4 times, call for national dialogue. And it is very important for us to dialogue with one another, not to dialogue violently in the streets, because the street dialogue is violent, is serious, is damaging, is not really for the good of anyone in Egypt. And in all the 4 times, the National Salvation Front refused to participate based on the formality of the invitation rather than the specific. I remember one invitation, the president said, come, and everything is open for discussion. Even the articles of the constitution that was approved by 63.8% of the Egyptians, let us discuss it all. Let us come to an agreement so that we can move forward. It is very unfortunate that the National Salvation Front is really insisting not to dialogue unless you agree on their conditions. Once you agree on their conditions, then dialogue becomes useless. You cannot really put conditions for dialogue, or then the issue of dialogue is not there. And I hope that they will be able, especially recently now, the situation is getting out of the hands of so many, and I think it is not helpful for the country, for the democratic process, that we continue, that the streets continue to be violent, and that the clashes continue to be between the police and the populace. Especially the National Salvation Front is providing a political clout for the violent clashes. And that is not good for Egypt. Until just a few days ago, they did not condemn the violence that is taking place in the streets of Egypt. For politics, we need to be able to dialogue things rather than to violently oppose one another. Concerning consensus, there is a problem with consensus. Some of the members of the National Salvation Front understand consensus, you have to agree with what I say so that we can call it consensus. But this is not how consensus gets about. Consensus is we all come, listen to one another, talk with one another, and meet somewhere. We have to, of course, we have the populace of Egypt. We cannot, and we will not as Egyptians, allow even the President Morsi to change or amend any article of the Constitution without going back to the people of Egypt, because the people of Egypt were the ones who approved that referendum. So it is that challenge of democracy, that challenge of willingness to go back to the people. And when I have in my dialogues with the representatives of the National Salvation Front, I always say, let us just go back to the people. In less than 4 months, there is parliamentary election. Please work hard, get connected with the people, so that you can go and get the votes you need, so that you can participate, either make the government yourself, or participate in the government, or form a considerable opposition. I think if they can do this, will be better for them, for us, and for the rest of Egypt.
I'd like to talk a bit about the parliamentary elections, but before I do that, just one final question on the issue of the national dialogue. Both sides sort of tend to accuse the other of having their own version of what consensus means. But given that, how can the government actually move things forward? Is the Al-Azhar-led initiative for national dialogue an option?
It is an option. It is a great option. And Al-Azhar-led dialogue is very important, because Al-Azhar has a special place in the Egyptian politics and also in the Egyptian history. The difficulty is the National Salvation Front right after they came after the Al-Azhar initiative, and the next day he supported the marches in the street that came to be known that will lead to violence. So it is not really, they cannot really come and negotiate things in a closed room and then go out support the violent clashes in the street. I hope that all can stick to the Al-Azhar initiative and move forward in this direction.
But since it's the government's responsibility to try and include even those who don't wish to be included, or to try and invest the opposition in the process, that issue seems to be one that will come up repeatedly. But moving on to elections and to the issue of other groups who aren't well represented, I just wanted to talk about youth and civil society groups. Since they spearheaded the revolution, what attempt has the government made to bring such voices to the table, particularly the youth?
Particularly the youth. There is no doubt that the youth were the ones who led the revolution in the streets of Egypt. And I can speak on the Freedom and Justice Party level. I am not here a representative of the government itself to speak really on behalf of the government. Yeah. But from the Freedom and Justice Party, the involvement of youth in the leadership position is really moving in the right direction. Again, we're talking about the difference between times of Mubarak and the new times. Now we're having young leaders in my home constituency are leading, not only preparing themselves for the municipal elections. In fact, we have people under age of 40 running for parliament from my hometown in the coming election. We're really encouraging not only young men, but also young women to participate to a great extent in the coming election and also in the municipalities. It is going to take us some time. Mm-hmm. In the past, the young were kind of alienated from the political process. We did not feel that the country was ours. We did not really feel the sense of belonging. So it is going to take us some time until the young really have this feeling and then participate to a larger extent in the governmental posts, as well as, for example, we have a couple of ministers now are really way under the age of 50, which is a plus in a traditional government that we used to have in Egypt. And the governors were really asking President Morsi to try to include younger governors so that they can show good example for the younger people of their own governing rights. It is going to take us some time, Nur. So hopefully the process will continue in this direction. I'm very optimistic that we will be able to get there.
But talking of young people, that brings us to another key issue, which is the issue of the economy. When I interviewed young political activists in Luxor, every single one of them said that the two most important issues, particularly in a tourist town actually, were the economy and security. This is a critical time for the Egyptian economy as well. The IMF loan's been delayed, but even when the loan does go through, the government will actually have to reconcile expectations of people with the deeply unpopular cuts in spending that the plan will require. At the same time, you come from Luxor, which is Egypt's biggest tourist attraction, the town, and you have a close view of the transition's effects on the Egyptian economy. Could you talk a bit about how in Luxor how people in the tourist industry and you've been dealing with the economic issues that have come up during the last couple of years?
Yes. Let me briefly say a few words about Luxor, since I am coming from Luxor and I represent Luxor in the Egyptian parliament. Luxor has 1/3 of world monuments. It has 2/3 of Egypt monuments. It is one of the ancient cities on the face of the earth. And in this moment, I will be happy to introduce this gift, this papyrus from Egypt to Nur and to the IPI so that we continue this relationship between Luxor and the United States of America. Thank you. Thank you. So it is really important that we work together so that we move tourism and other aspects, because failing of Egypt is not really going to help anyone, neither Egyptians nor the United States of America or nor any other country. The economy in Luxor, because tourism gets impacted severely and very quickly by any form of turmoil. Even if there is a problem in Algeria, tourism gets impacted in Egypt. And also tourism did not really do a very good job during Mubarak era. Mubarak regime used to look at tourists as milking cows. So the tourists will come one time and leave, they may not come again. In that process, we're thinking of tourism. We would really like to be able to provide an alternative so that we can strengthen the human link. So the tourist does not only come to see the ancient buildings and ancient temples, but be able to connect with the people of Luxor so that we can create a better way of understanding one another. There is no doubt Luxor was hit bad. In fact, this morning, my niece called me, said, there is a letter came to you today. I said, would you please open it and tell me what is it about? She read it to me. She said, it is from the bazaars in Khalid ibn al-Walid streets are complaining about the negative practices of the carriage drivers in Luxor. And they wanted me to intervene to try to solve this particular problem. So tourism is impacted greatly. And since we have more than 70% of the population of my hometown Luxor working on tourism and the other 30 dependent on the 70 working on tourism. So we have an occupancy that went down from 80 or 70% of hotels, went sometimes during these past 2 years to 15 to 20%. We expected really the Christmas and the New Year, the occupancy ratio will go up, but unfortunately the disturbances that took place in Tahrir or in Cairo. For your information, when there is disturbance in Tahrir Square or in Cairo, that does not mean at all it is all over Egypt. Luxor is very peaceful. You come in Luxor, you can stay, and I think you witnessed that in your presence in Luxor. You stay until 11 o'clock at night or 12 o'clock, you can walk. It is very peaceful there. And I think I can speak of so many places other than Tahrir Square. So if you would like to visit, you don't need to stop at Tahrir Square, at least for this time. Concerning security, we have really problem with security. The police, there are certain elements of the police that does not want to do their job as supposed to be. And that is really disturbing us as a party, disturbing us as the people of Egypt. Why are they on a strike without necessarily announcing that they are on a strike? So they don't move fast and they do not go and address criminal issues or problems in the streets. That really needs a dialogue. I remember I was talking to the police chief of Luxor. I said, there are claims that you're not really doing your job right. He said, that requires a dialogue. And I think we need also to dialogue with them because they are, you remember the 25th January was the police day. And Egyptians moved on the police day, so they're hurt psychologically. And there is this psychological war that is building between them and the people. I think tourism will not come back as expected unless and until the security situation improves, and security may not improve until the political forces can come together and work together a way out of this.
You're right. There are two things happening with the police right now. One is that some police feel beleaguered by everything that's been happening in Tahrir, etc., and do not want to do their job. At the same time, a much bigger thing that's been happening is the tensions rising, which we saw with the funeral today in Tahrir of a person who allegedly died of torture, and as well as footage of a man who was stripped naked and being beaten by the police that's gone viral. When will police reform happen?
Police reform, it is a necessity. In fact, after I leave from the United States, I am flying to Tunisia. There is a conference about reforming the police and the judiciary. And remember, the four things have really to go together: reforming the police, reforming the judiciary, and reforming the state bureaucracy, and also some media outlets. I think it has to be done so quickly, and I expect President Morsi to do the best, and the government to do the best they can so that they can reform the police, so that the normal citizen can live, can feel secure, and feel that the police, you see, it has history. The police in Egypt was more of a state police, and meaning political police, protecting President Mubarak, and you can do anything during that time in Egypt. As long as you're not attacking the presidency, that was okay, that was accepted. So how can you move? It requires really a lot of psychological modification. How can one move from protecting a person to protecting a country, where the security of each and every citizen in the country means a lot? I hope it can be done so quickly. Mm-hmm. It is very much needed, and I think it has to be the beginning. We really want it because, you know, when you have so many doors open at you as a practical step, you take one at a time rather than tackling all the serious issues of our experience with reforming the judiciary. Just give you one example. The judiciary, the judges in Mubarak's era used to make their children the judges. So they would appoint them regardless of their grades. If they get the lowest grade, and some of the students will get the highest grades, but those students belong to poor families, they will not be appointed in the judiciary. But they will bring the poor graded students and appoint them in the judiciary so that they can. So you have a whole structure of corruption. President Morsi did just one step. He made the declaration that for the past 10 years, those graduate students, law students, and other students who can qualify to work in the judiciary have the right to reapply. And those who deserve to be appointed in the judiciary, and those are people from the villages, people from poor families. Now, if we can really inject the poor Egyptians into the judiciary, this is likely to help. And the police reforming requires a lot of work in this direction. Hopefully we'll be able to start working on it right away once it requires political stability. And if we can achieve the political stability, then reforming the police is likely to follow.
Yeah. Well, the issue of political stability then takes us back to the necessity for a national dialogue, yes, for there to be stability. But since you were talking about the culture under Mubarak and now, and we talked about police reform and judicial reform as well. But how about, we touched upon this issue of state institutions and how the revolution hasn't filtered down. What do you see as the biggest obstacle to why has reform not happened faster? Because already the government's been in power for almost a year now.
Yeah.
So could you talk a bit about that?
Reform requires two phases. Number one is the reform of the system in itself, where the laws are made. Until today, we do not have a parliament. The parliament was unfairly dissolved. For no real reason, we were taken out of our own jobs. If we were there, we would be able to institute the laws that would create the reform or make the reform happen. So now there is no parliament. The president cannot do the legislative power. We're waiting for the parliament to come. So this is one aspect. The other aspect is we think of reform that has two faces of the same coin. One is the system, the laws, we need to change them. The second, because what happened in Mubarak's Egypt, the governor of Luxor, for example, or many other governors and many other presidents of university used to rob the Egyptians legally. There was legal robbery in Egypt during Mubarak's time. So how to change it? We need to change the legal system. So they're all interconnected with one another. And also at the same time, we think part of it is we need to change what is inside the Egyptian citizens themselves, so that because Egyptians do not trust the system until today. So they never trusted the system before. We always refer to the system as their system, not our system. Now it is going to take us some time until we really believe that this is our system, this is our country, and what is good. If we see something wrong, we will be able to report it. And this is what I keep sharing with Egyptian citizens in Luxor, that please, if you see bribery, if you see anything. I remember when I was in the parliament, I was contacted by a young Egyptian looking for a job of being a teacher. And he told me, doctor, someone wanted to give me a job, but he asked it for 17,000 Egyptian pounds. Imagine, that was after the revolution. So I told them, would you be able to make sure that you can videotape the transaction or bring me an evidence that can prove that this is the case. But what happens, I went to the parliament. In the parliament, I stated clearly, and this is on the record, that this is happening in Egypt. And I called upon the minister involved, you really need to intervene so that you put an end to this bribery. But what happened when I invited that young man to speak to the media? He was afraid, because fear is still inside the hearts and minds of many young Egyptians. So it is going to really take us some time until we move in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. We've talked a lot about domestic issues. I'd just like to shift the conversation a bit to foreign policy now. Since President Morsi assumed office, Egyptian relations with the US seem to be fairly stable. In fact, you were at the helm of the first delegation to visit the White House last April. In what way has a Muslim Brotherhood presidency changed this relationship, and what can you tell us about its future?
Yeah. The Muslim Brotherhood was unfairly portrayed as a radical organization. I have known the Muslim Brotherhood for years, and their teaching was really inviting for dialogue. Dialogue with others, dialogue with with everyone we can. I mean, their willingness to come to middle terms or to come to common grounds with others was really an integral part of the teachings of the Muslim Brotherhood. And we have this history. In Egypt, it is a living history. Look at our relationship with Muslims and Christians in Egypt. We've been living together for the past 1,400 years. Look at the hanging church in Egypt. It is there even before Muslims came to Egypt. So we have really a proven experience in Egypt that we can work together. And the Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt is part of Egypt. In fact, when the Europeans came and occupied Egypt, there were three directions. One direction, let us forget about Europe. Let us not deal at all with Europe. The second direction was, no, let us embrace Europe and let us take all what Europe has. A third, a middle ground alternative was, no, let us look at our tradition and bring the best out of it, and let us look at Europe and bring the best out of it and mix them together. That last alternative was, in fact, the Muslim Brotherhood alternative. When I was, in fact, President Mohammed Morsi, when he was the head of the party, he sent me with other three individuals from the Freedom and Justice Party to come here, and he gave really two specific messages. Number one, that Egypt has changed, and we expect the United change also to change its paradigm in dealing with Egypt. So Egypt was able to get rid of its inferiority complex. We don't think we're inferior anymore. During Mubarak years, we did not feel we are Egyptians. We felt as if we're living as prisoners inside our own homes and inside our own countries. I could not teach in the university what I wanted to teach the students. So in Egypt, we've gotten rid of the inferiority complex. And will the United States and the European world be able to get rid of the superiority complex? I think it is very important from now on that we deal with Egypt as not Egypt of Morsi, or Egypt of the Freedom and Justice Party, or Egypt even of the Muslim Brotherhood. It's Egypt of 90 million Egyptians. The popular voice is very important. That was his first message, is tell the Americans we have changed. And it is very important for the United States administration, Congress, and the people of the great people of the United States to really think of Egypt as a great democracy. And then he emphasized the fact that we need to develop a paradigm that is based on mutual understanding and mutual respect. And he made very clear to me that we're committed to respecting all international agreements. That was when he was the head of the party. So you expect him now, when he is the president of the country, to be more committed to these principles. Not only that, in fact, to push it forward. I remember I was a member of when I was in the parliament, I was a member of the Foreign Relations Committee. And the way we dealt with the foreign relation, we made 4 circles. Egypt in the middle, then there is the African circle surrounding Egypt, the Arab circle, the Muslim circle, and the international circle. And as you say, you saw right after the presidency, President Morsi traveled to so many different countries. We're very much interested in working together with all other countries based on these two principles, mutual understanding and mutual respect.
Well, what you say is so interesting, and there are many questions I could ask after that, including about Egypt's relationships with the Gulf. It's interesting to see how much Qatar has invested. But I'm looking at the time, and I know that the audience also is keen to ask questions. So I now want to open the floor for a conversation with the audience. We have about 45 minutes. We'll take one question at a time. Can you please state your name and affiliation before you ask the question?
Thank you. William Verdone. About a year and a half ago, the Pope Shenouda, yes, of the Coptic Church died. How, in terms of religious freedom that you were alluding to before, how thriving is the Coptic Church? And is there danger from being a member of that church? Thank you.
Thank you. Let me ask the second question first. Is there a danger? No, not at all. And no one will allow any danger for the followers of the Coptic Church. The Coptic Church is not a minority. That's a fact. They're part and parcel of the Egyptian people. We did not discriminate against the Coptic Church for the past 1400s. We wouldn't discriminate against them now. For those who don't know, in Egyptian villages and the cities, you would find Christians and Muslims living next to one another. I would like you, when you think of the Coptic-Muslim relation, compare it to the Muslim-Catholic relation in Spain or in Bosnia. You would find very big difference. It is not even comparable. So the relationship is very brotherly based, and because Islam holds Jesus and Mary as a great personalities in the Muslim history. In fact, a Muslim is not a Muslim until he or she respects Jesus and Mary. In fact, you would find many Muslim women have their headscarf because they try to imitate Mary in the way she looks when you see Mary in all Catholic churches. So we have this history, this important history, and we cannot let it go. This history, we're proud of it, and we're determined to make out of Egypt as ornament of the world. We would like to show that Muslims, Christians, and Jews can live together peacefully. That's why in the Constitution, Article 3, we made it very clear that Christians and Jews can live according to their own biblical traditions. That's an important, I don't think it exists in any other constitution as far as I know in the world. So this is important, an important step in the right direction, and we're likely to take more steps. I know for sure during Mubarak, Christians were discriminated against. I know this for a fact. I lived it, I opposed it, I stood against it, and I stood against it because I'm a Muslim. Discrimination is a crime in Islam. So it is a principal position. It is not a political. What I'm speaking with you, sir, now is not a political stand. It's a stand of a principle. I believe Islam teaches us if someone hurts a Christian, it is as if hurting God himself. So that is the understanding that is based. I expect the relation. I am not happy with how some Coptic Christians use the political situation for different reasons, but the majority of the Copts, in my home city, Luxor, it has one of the largest number of population in the Luxor city is Christian. So when I ran for election, they supported me. When I won the election, they came to my home. We have a very cordial relationship that is likely to continue.
Okay, Warren Hogue, yeah.
Warren Hogue, IPI, and let me endorse the welcome. We are very happy you were here.
Thank you.
Dr. Dardery, and it's been very interesting what you've been saying. I wanted to ask you about something you said at the very beginning. You talked about 4 institutional parts of Egyptian life that were in need of reform and that even were suffering from corruption. And that was the police, the judiciary, the state bureaucracy, and the media. But there is a part of Egyptian life that I understand where there is great power, and that is the military. And I want to ask you, between the military in Egypt, is there a need for reform between the relations, say, from your party or from the government and the military? And also, the military, I'm told, has great power in the economic area, and a lot of the future of your economy is dependent upon that relationship being a good one.
A unique characteristic of the Egyptian military, it is very devoted to the national interest of Egypt. But the military was part of a corrupt regime. So it had to be influenced by the corruption. And the economic dimension that you refer to is very true, but it is going to take some time until we can reform that economic dimension. We keep in mind the Turkish experience that took them about 10 years or so to be able to reform the economic relationship between the military, the Turkish military and the state. I think it may not take that much long time in Egypt, but it is needed and it has to come, but it's just a matter of priorities. So first things first, I think if we get done with the police, get done reform the police, reform the judiciary, reform the state structure, because that impacts the individual citizens directly. Imagine when someone would like to get a birth certificate. He or she has to pay money to get the birth certificate. This has to come to an end. And then the reform of the military may come later. But the military has really to take part in the reforming, because the military is a very respected institution in the Egyptian history and in the Egyptian mind. And we cannot forget the favor that the Egyptian, compare the Egyptian military with the Syrian military, for example. A big difference. So we would like to keep this into consideration so that reform can take place gradually and take place in the short term, inshallah.
Yeah. This person over here, this gentleman over here, and then I'll move to the back.
Thank you, and thanks for Abdul Mawgoud for his presentation. I listened carefully to what you were saying, and I noticed that you have used quite often the word "it's going to take time." In politics, time, of course, is an important element, because we will go for elections next March, and it is until now unclear what is the vision of the Freedom and Justice Party during the transition period in Egypt. You're still using some language that I'm afraid say you used to hear it before in Egypt, that it needs time. And we have listened this. In fact, after the revolution 1952, the government used to say the same thing. There was a corrupt regime during, the king time, and the institution needs to be also reformed. But now, I don't disagree with what you are saying.
Thank you.
What I'm saying is, how much time, and do you have this time to do the reform that you will, talking on behalf of your party? Because if you will not be able to do that, there will be an erosion of your popularity, and you will get again to a vicious circle in the development of Egypt. Lastly, my name is Adel Abdul Latif. I'm Egyptian, and I work for the United Nations Development Program.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Adel, for agreeing with me first. And let me discuss the area where we didn't agree upon. Of course, since you're Egyptian, you know that there is a big difference between Nasser's 1952 and Mubarak and the coming revolution. Big difference is the people's element. In Nasser's time, the people did not matter that much. In Mubarak, he didn't even care about what the people think. But here and now, if the Freedom and Justice Party does not consider the people's opinion, they're going to be out. That is what is happening. That is the new thing in Egypt. I cannot guarantee, if I don't do service to the people of Luxor, that I will be elected next election. So that's a big factor. For the Freedom and Justice Party, we would like to do the election as soon as possible. because we've decided from day one that we would like to take specific steps towards stability. We did the first parliamentary election. We didn't want the parliament to be dissolved. Then we did the Shura election, then the presidential, then the first referendum, then the second referendum. And we would really like to get it done in April if we can. It is just the political instability that is caused by the National Salvation Front that is derailing the process. We don't really want it to be derailed long enough. It should not pass June. We should have a new parliament in Egypt, and the new government will move on. And I expect Egypt will rise up again, inshallah.
There are two hands up at the back, Zubaydah and then Omar over there. So the lady in the brown jacket.
Zubaydah Rasool, thank you very much for your presentation. And I have a very simple question concerning, well, it's not a simple question, but concerning political opposition groups in general. Excuse me. I took note of what you said about the corruption in the 4 sectors. Political opposition sometimes might not meet what strictly might be defined as the parameters for political opposition. And my question concerns the official policy of your party, and if you can, from the Muslim Brotherhood, concerning the participation of all sorts of political opposition in Egypt, those that meet your requirements and definitions and those that don't, since these represent and might represent the people of Egypt. Thank you.
Thank you. But I totally agree with you that our understanding, by opposition we mean the other. Anyone who is the other is willing to participate. We would really like, we think that we cannot have a strong government unless we have a strong opposition. The presence of opposition is very important for the government of Egypt. And we know for sure we're not going to stay there forever. We need a democratic process where those who get elected get the power to serve the people, and then if they don't serve the people, they get it changed and another group of people can come. And we would like to keep this cycle for the interest, for the national interests of the Egyptians. For us as the Freedom and Justice Party, we don't define the opposition. The opposition really need to define themselves, and we hope that they get united. We really wanted them to go for the election with one list of names, but they couldn't agree on whom each party will push on the top of the list. So that has a lot to do also with the time of Mubarak. You know, during the time of Mubarak, there was no opposition. The only group that was functioning secretly was the Muslim Brotherhood. So that's why it is gaining. People have great respect for the members of the Brotherhood because they endured the prison time and they came out stronger. They endured the suffering. We lost a lot. Our families suffered a lot during Mubarak's regime. And the other opposition did not really suffer as much as it. Some of them even did not suffer at all. Some of them even were part of the previous regime. A leading member of the National Salvation Front was the foreign secretary of the Mubarak's regime. So those people do not really have a strong support within the populace. And that is what is really causing the political turmoil at the time being. But we very much appreciate the strong opposition, and we will be happy with the strong opposition. In fact, the strong opposition empowers us and makes us get more connected with the people. And hopefully, all what we say, let us compete in serving the people of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to once again thank Dr. Dardari for coming. I'm Omar El Okda. I'm with IPI, and I'm also Egyptian. I just had 2 questions. Your visit coincides with one of the darkest periods in Egypt since the revolution. We've had almost a death toll of 50 people in the last 10 days, and violence in Port Said, Alexandria, Cairo, and Suez. There are militias, armed groups. We've been reading about all kinds of things, and we've really not touched very much on that in this talk. So I was wondering if you could comment on what has been going on in the last 10 days. And my second question, in your comment earlier, you mentioned that the Muslim Brotherhood's platform is one that really upholds the Egypt for all Egyptians philosophy. And you mentioned that the cabinet and local governments are not dominated by the Islamist faction. But what about the constitution drafting process? The assembly was absolutely Islamist dominated, and the very last few days was a very strange and out of the ordinary display of a hurried process, which led to the pulling out of the Coptic Church and the liberal groups. So I was just wondering if you could comment about that in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. Thank you for so many people from Egypt working with the IPI. Concerning the first question, Omar, what happens in Egypt, whether the Port Said, the Suez Canal governorates, or Tahrir or Ittihadiyya, or any place, Egyptian blood is so special. It breaks my heart. I was on the 25th of January, I was in Minnesota, and the Egyptians of Minnesota wanted to make a celebration. And I was invited to the meeting, and I didn't really feel the celebration spirit. We still have a long way to go. The killings is to be condemned by all. And in fact, there should not be. But again, it is one of the evolution process that is happening after the revolution. And no one should be happy that any Egyptian, whether from the opposition or from the police or from the Freedom and Justice Party, it does not really matter. There is something called Egyptian blood. And that means all Egyptians, not really particular. So it is sad, it hurts us all, it really damages the spirit of the revolution, and it really damages the image of Tahrir Square. And we would like from now on to be able to replace the violent clashes with dialogues, to be able to sit and dialogue with one another. I was really happy sometime when I would pass, when I was going to the parliament, and I will stop in Tahrir Square, and people comes around me and we start a dialogue. We agree and disagree. At the end of the day, we keep working for the betterment of Egypt. It is going to take us some time again. And I'm sorry to use the word time again. I'll keep using it. We're part of time. So no, let me answer the second question quickly, please. Concerning the Constituent Assembly, and allow me to say a few words about this, because I was really an active player. I elected the existing Constituent Assembly. And it was the referendum that Egyptians agreed upon, with almost 78%. They said the People's Assembly will elect the Constituent Assembly. And Egyptians agreed. When Egyptians speak, all of us have to respect their say. So we elected them. They started working. They're supposed to finish the Constitution in 6 months. They started working for 5.5 months together. They agreed together almost on 95% of the Constitution. But then for political reasons, the Coptic Church and some opposition, some secular opposition, decided to leave the Constituent Assembly. I wish they left it at the very beginning. I wish they didn't sign to go on for the rest of the period and produce a constitution to be presented to the Egyptian people. But they stayed working 5.5 months, and I discussed, whoever tells you that the constitution was done in 48 hours is a big lie. It's not true at all. They were working for 6 months, and they produced a human document. It is the high expectation of the Egyptian that that constitution had to be perfect. It wouldn't be perfect. The American constitution was amended a couple of times. Many times. So we expect also the Egyptian constitution to be amended as well. In fact, there is a mechanism in the Egyptian constitution that teaches us how to amend the constitution. And when I tried to add up the days, it would take Egyptians 1 year to amend, if not the whole constitution, 50% of the constitution. So there is a democratic process. And that is what we, Freedom and Justice Party and the opposition, need to learn, that in a democracy, we really need to respect the ballot box. We need to respect the results. Imagine this situation. After President Barack Obama won the election, imagine the Republicans went surrounding the White House and throwing bombs at the White House because President Barack Obama won the election. Would this be a democracy? That is what we need to do in Egypt. And as Egyptians living abroad, you have a great responsibility to help us in Egypt. We need your help as Egyptians, as Arabs, and others in general. Help us so that this baby democratic steps can stand up, because Egypt democracy will impact the Arab world and the Muslim world, will have a great impact on the African continent, and I think we can produce a better world. Let us not repeat history. We would like to get away from the confrontational attitude of historical forces and to try to present a better alternative where all of us can agree or disagree, but at least respect one another. Thank you, Omar.
The lady in red at the back, and then we'll move up front. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to thank you for conducting an excellent session and to thank you very much for your eloquence and honesty.
Thank you.
In that speech, I think it would be very helpful if you could tell us, we know that the political culture is less than perfect. We do realize that there is multiple levels of corruption in Egyptian society. And as an Egyptian, I'm quite curious, yet another one, I'm quite curious to be able to hear your particular, if I was to ask you 3 things you feel yourself and or your party need to do in order to tackle what is going on in a short time frame. Because yes, of course, everything takes time, but we don't really have that much time. And the NSF is not going anywhere, and the political opposition will remain as disentangled and dispersed and completely ineffective as it is now, and the violence will escalate. What are the 3 things that you think have to be done and you would be working towards yourself and within your party, that your party is committed to do? So when you ask for Egyptians abroad to be helpful, what do we need to be helpful in exactly? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I will really be happy if I ever come again is to meet with the Egyptian so that we can talk about the specifics of what we need. We need a lot from you as Egyptians, at least to help us transfer the experience of other countries or other revolution and help us with a certain mechanism by which we reform. Because sometimes reform is looked at as a personal attack against the police. So the reform does not take place. So if you ask me about 3 things, of course, reforming the police, the judiciary, and the state bureaucracy. These are crucial to the people of Egypt. But what I personally see needed very much most is we're still, just 2 years ago, we could not voice our opinions. So we don't know how to voice our opinion and listen to the other perspective. Most of the time we shout. It becomes more of a shouting match. When you meet Egyptians, then it becomes a shouting match. No one benefits out of the discussion. If we can learn the blessings of listening first, understanding first, and then seek to be understood. That's a very important principle. I am trying to help in Luxor. It is very difficult though, because we as human beings, we have limited capacity in listening. But the other party, sometimes they keep talking and talking and talking again without listening. I hope this negative habit of us in Egypt, and I am very optimistic, and I'm sorry again, it takes time. And it is a learning process. It is education. And as you know, education, and I am a university professor, I know you don't teach from the first class, you achieve what you want. It takes a couple of classes. So hopefully in a couple of classes, and by class call it a year, in a couple of years, we as Egyptians, as all of us, let us work together to create this ornament of the world.
Okay, the gentleman here in gray. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Kahraman Haliselik. I'm with Turkey's National Public Broadcasting Television. I'd like to ask you about the word Islamist. I've heard through this conversation here a few times that people are actually worried about whether you are Islamist or you're people of democracy, or if President Morsi is Islamist or he believes in constitution and democracy. Is your constitution Islamist or is it inclusive? And do you really get bothered by the word Islamist? Because we had the same thing in Turkey in the beginning. Still, people use the word Islamist against the Prime Minister Erdogan, but he thinks, and he says, that he's a Muslim person, but he lives in democracy. What is the distinction in Egypt? Thank you.
Thank you. Very complicated issues. For Islamists, please don't blame us. Blame the French. because the French were the first to coin it. We didn't coin it. We didn't make it. They called us. So don't blame me for being called Islam. Does it irritate me? It does not irritate me. What irritates me if it is misunderstood. Is there a difference between democracy and Islam, or Muslims and democracy? Not at all. What about the Egyptian constitution? Is it Islamist? No, it is Egyptian. It's Egyptian constitution from the beginning to the end. Can Muslims live in democracy? In fact, Muslims believe that from early days of Islam, they lived instead of calling it democracy, we call it shurocracy. And shurocracy is consultation. The process of consultation can become really a democratic process. So we have a lot in common with democracy. It is sometimes these misconceptions stand in the way from understanding one another first-hand information. I think we'll be able to overcome. It is just a matter of information. And we're willing to go all the way in this direction. Thank you.
The lady in the back's had her hand up for a long time.
My name is Mikiko Sawanishi, working for UN Democracy Fund. I have a very simple question about
Please.
the presence of women in parliament, because our partner civil society organization in Egypt are informing severe decline of women's presence. They're saying 12% before revolution, now it's 2%. Lack of a quota and then other issues. I just want to know the background of this problem and then possible solution to have an inclusive voice. Thank you.
Thank you. You called it a simple question, but it is not simple at all. The issue of women in Egypt is a cultural issue. It is not a political issue. And during the past regime, if we're told that it was 12%, but it was orchestrated 12%. In Egypt, there was no democracy during Mubarak's era. Whomever is agreed upon or blessed by the police would get elected. If you don't go along with what the police state want, you will not get it. So it is not really a good example to take the previous regime's presence of women. Do we have a problem? I confess there is a problem. There is a cultural problem. It is not a political problem. In fact, the recent parliament, the largest number of women in the parliament were from the Muslim Brotherhood. We're from the Freedom and Justice Party. Are we, as members of the Freedom and Justice Party, happy with the place? No, not at all. In fact, in Luxor, I am doing as much as I can to encourage women, young university graduates, to get involved in politics and to participate in the political process. I am really happy to declare that about more than 50% of the votes I got in Luxor came from young women university graduates. So is it going to change overnight? Experiences tell us, no, it does not change overnight. It is very tough. Can you compare the situation in Egypt with the situation of Afghanistan? Not at all. Can you compare it even with Saudi Arabia? Not at all. Women in Egypt are becoming judges, they're becoming university professors, all types. So it is going to take us, again, some time until we'll be able to overcome. Usually changes take time. And those who think that the revolution took place on the 25th of January are mistaken. That revolution, we've been working for it for the past 213 years. We tried it in many different ways. We tried the top-down approach. We tried the military approach. We only succeeded when it became a popular approach. And I think will be one of the ramifications of the revolution is the place of women and Egyptian women. Here you go. Egyptian women have to play a major role in this direction.
John Hash, yeah.
First of all, thank you very much. I join everybody else in thanking you and wishing well for Egypt. I wanted to follow up again, though, on Warren's question about the military, because the way you answered him, the military was kind of a passive group. In other words, first of all, they were not one of the four groups you mentioned as corrupt. So are they or are they not corrupt? And secondly, again, the way you responded to him, it's as if the military does not have an active role in the present situation, just going to wait for some reform to happen eventually. So is there, I mean, that's at least what I heard you suggest. So is there some, what is the role of the military? Are they, you know, actively engaged? Is there a risk of a coup? You know, is there a risk that they will interfere in the democratic process? So if you could sort of shed a little more light on the role of the military, I think that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Of course, I wouldn't know what the military is thinking of doing now in Egypt, but I think we've passed the days of coups. I think coup d'etats are not anymore an option, and the military knows this, and the past 2 years' experience in Egypt gave a clear lesson to the military that ruling Egypt through the military is a very, almost impossible job for them to do, nor the Egyptians would allow this to happen. What I stated earlier is that the military was part of a corrupt system. And to be part of a corrupt system, you have to get some corruption. But when you compare the police corruption and the military corruption, there is a big difference because the police directly is involved with the people of Egypt. The military has to do a lot with the borders of Egypt. We hear the military leaders are saying there is no way for us. The opposition wanted to get the military involved in the discussion, the political discussion. The military said, no, we're not part of a political alternative. This is for you as politicians to discuss and make a decision about it. But for us as the military, we're protecting the state and the interest of, they have a nice word of putting it, we're protecting the interest of the Egyptian people. And by this, when they were asked to explain, they said, whatever the people of Egypt choose, this is what we're going to protect. So the only dimension that needs to be addressed is the economic dimension of the military. Will the military continue being involved in military? That is something has to stop, and the Egyptian civilian leadership has to do something. But when and how, time will tell.
The lady over there in brown, yeah, green.
My name is Roma Stibrovi. I'm president of NGO Sustainability. My question is, and maybe it sounds a bit naive, but what is the main difference between your party and the opposition?
If there is one main difference, is the popularity. The majority of Egyptian people so this is a clear difference we agree upon. In philosophy is we're highly committed to democracy. And I think they're not as committed as we are. Because they know that they're, to great extent, detached from the populace. We live with the people. I live with the villagers. I am one of them. I don't think of myself as superior to them. I go to their cafes, I go to their funerals, I participate with them in all that. That is a big difference. I am well connected, well attached to the people of Egypt, and highly committed to the democratic alternative.
Well, the lady over there, and then we have time for just one more question after that.
Yes, it's Rhonda Halbin, and I'm an online columnist for Taz.de, which is Die Tageszeitung. In my research about the Egyptian revolution, what I found was there was dialogue between the religious and the secular over the political problems of the old regime. And that helped to set a basis for the different people to work together, the different groups to work together. And that was very, very interesting, and they made progress because of that. I'm wondering what your party's view is towards encouraging that kind of dialogue and the role of the internet and of netizens in order to, and spreading the net among the people so that there can be this mechanism of the different opinions exchanging their views and learning from each other.
Yes, thank you. For us as the Freedom and Justice Party, dialogue is a necessity. There is no other way to solving the problems of Egypt other than through dialogue. The difficulty is the National Salvation Front is putting conditions before the dialogue takes place. And that is what is making it difficult, a condition sometimes impossible to meet. Like, you need to change, you need to commit yourself to change the constitution before we meet. You need to do this and that before we meet. These are impossible conditions. I don't think they're good for democracy. The conditions, I think if they all meet together and they try to come up with a different national program, national reform program, where the opposition and the Freedom and Justice Party can meet together and move with the country forward, I think it will be good for everyone. Whether every time the president, the vice president, the leaders of the Freedom and Justice Party call for dialogue. 4 times the president himself called for national dialogue. Al-Azhar University called for a dialogue. They participated, and then the next day they appeared as if they did not participate in the dialogue. Dialogue requires at least 2 groups of people where both are committed. One group of people will not be enough to make a successful dialogue. I hope and I expect by the end of the day, we will be the National Salvation Front and the Freedom and Justice Party and other parties in Egypt will be able to come together, because violence leads to no solution. We cannot achieve anything, especially with a president who was elected by the people. And because he was elected by the people, the only way to remove him is by the ballot box. And we're highly committed, and the majority of the Egyptian people are committed to the ballot box as the only alternative valid in Egypt from now on.
Peter at the back, and I'm sure at the end of this, there'll be a few minutes for those who didn't get to ask questions to talk to Dr. Dardery.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm not Egyptian. I'm from South Africa, where we went through a tortuous, long period of discussion, negotiating, fighting, in order to arrive at a constitution which is an almost miraculous constitution in a country which everyone said would explode. The lesson that I learned there is that it's easy to talk about dialogue, dialogue, dialogue. It's also quite easy to say democracy means the majority decides. That's almost what you said. It's precisely in those situations where there are minority fears, concerns, legitimate ones, take the Copts or the liberal groups in Egypt, that a majority needs to say, if we are going to have stability in this country, it's not going to happen by ramming it through. It is going to happen by seriously taking on board the concerns of minorities. Now, my concern, the way I read it as an outsider in Egypt, is that the constitution, which is at the moment up for discussion, was rammed through. It was rammed through in the sense that the word dialogue was thrown out all the time, but one never got the impression that it was a serious willingness to look at a constitutional outcome which may not be entirely in line with what the Muslim Brotherhood has in mind or other groups. I'm not an expert, so, don't you think that this is where you fell short, that you tried to rush through a constitution without seriously taking on board the concerns of minority groups? Seriously, not just saying dialogue, 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 but seriously reaching compromises.
Thank you. Did we rush the constitution through? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. We really, in my hometown, I received at least 3-4 versions, early versions of the constitution. And I would take the version, distribute it to the people of Luxor, read them, discuss them, come up with alternative, and send them back to the central, to the committee that was drafting the constitution. And the different members of the constituent assembly toured throughout Egypt to discuss the articles agreed upon. And 95% of the articles in the constitution agreed upon by the Coptic Church, by the liberals, and by the Muslim Brotherhood, by the other members. 95%. There was a disagreement on the 5%, and they couldn't reach an agreement. So they decided, we will go for voting. And the first round of voting, it has to get a certain percentage of yes or no, and then they will do another voting. They really did the best they could, keeping the conditions, keeping the pressure under which the country, there is a serious pressure in Egypt from the populace to get the state institution stabilized and to start delivering services to the people. So this pressure, we cannot really forget it. And sometimes if you cannot achieve the best. You need to achieve whatever is possible there and move forward so that time will be able, through negotiation, through discussion, through dialogue, and through the democratic process, will be able to reach a better alternative from the one we had. The majority has the responsibility to listen to the minority. And that's what we do. But the problem we find is the minority does not respect the decision of the majority. And this is where we're in this catch-22. If you dialogue, you lose. If you don't dialogue, you lose. So it is going to take... there is no magic solution to this particular problem. Concerning your connection to South Africa, we look upon the experience in South Africa as a very important, very enlightening experience to some extent in Egypt. I remember when I was in DC, we visited the ambassador of South Africa, and we learned a lot from the challenges that you faced. The Truth and Reconciliation Committee, for example, was one of the possible alternatives we were trying to discuss in the Egyptian parliament when it was in session. We are in a learning process, all of us, whether majority or minority. And I hope neither the majority pushes too much nor the minority imposes itself too much, so that they can really, there is a need for compromise from both, not just the minority, but also the majority as well. Thank you.
To end, I just have one final question for you, which actually relates to the audience's desire for something where time is not an issue. So in your personal opinion, in what way has Egypt actually changed for the better in the last 2 years? And the option of saying that the Freedom and Justice Party's popularity has gone up is out. Other than that.
There is one major difference that is done in Egypt away from the Freedom and Justice Party majority, is that I can walk, participate in marches in the streets of Luxor, and go home safe, and know that I will not be contacted by the police, or I will not be, quote unquote, visited by the security apparatus at 3:00 a.m. being arrested from in front of my family. This is a big step in the right direction. And the breakdown of fear, we're not fearful anymore. You would find a young Egyptian standing in front of a police officer telling him, no, sir, what you're doing is not right. Or show me your ID. That is new language in Egypt. We never did this before. We never dared to speak up to the police. The police can do anything, can strip us of almost anything, can confiscate what we have without us being able to ask. Now I can tell you, young Egyptians, I'm proud of them, standing up to the police and tell them, no, you have no right to do this to us. Show me your ID and I will report you. That is the new Egypt that's happening now.
Well, Dr. Dardari, thank you so very much for being here with us today.
Thank you.